through anyone who would take them and not a specific person, meaning that he's not part of a wider network of gamblers here. So if he's involved with the West Side Crew or the guys in Milwaukee, it's not obvious because he's not in that hierarchy of how you manage the money.
So he probably is working with the West Side Crew, but it's more or less on a one-on-one, one-off situation where he might go and say, I got some bets here, and then works with them to get, I don't know how this whole gambling thing works. Or I guess he could just be doing it completely independent, right?
They are alleging that he's completely independent, which seems unlikely, but I don't know. Maybe Kenosha didn't crack down on it the way that Milwaukee did. Because in Milwaukee, if you were an independent bookie, Frank Ballestri wasn't going to tolerate that. He was going to at least take a cut from you if you're going to try to be independent. Maybe Kenosha was more lenient. I don't know. Yeah. I can't imagine they would be, but maybe. He had to appear before Judge Zevers August 6, 1965. He was charged with gambling stemming from a John Doe probe that had been in Kenosha looking into gambling. And he had a preliminary hearing, which was scheduled to be August 16th. That comes along. He has his preliminary hearing for commercial gambling. His attorney is Dominic Frinzi, which that jumps out at you.
Heard that name a couple times, huh?
Yeah, because he's known as like the mob attorney in Milwaukee. Kind of odd that he's the attorney in Kenosha. I'm sure there's other attorneys you could get in Kenosha, but he definitely knows how to defend gamblers, so that's not unusual. Charged along with Squeaky were Cookie Scola and Dante Cardinale, and Dante does not have a cool nickname. The prosecutor called 4 witnesses who testified they'd played poker for money in the apartment over Dante's Tavern. There was a barber who said he started his gambling nights at the Eagles Club, but if he was getting hooked on gambling that day and not winning, he would venture over to the apartment. The barber said that the Eagles game, the game at the Eagles Club, would have a $50 pot, and they would rotate dealers, whereas the apartment did not have a rotating dealer. So there was an actual house dealer involved.
Okay.
Which this is not, it sounds like really petty, but this is like how to distinguish between like a friendly game and a game where someone's actually like profiting off of it.
So when they say that you have a rotating dealer, that they're suggesting that the players, one of them takes on the dealing.
Yes.
It's not like the company, like whoever's running the game is bringing multiple dealers in. It's
correct.
Just that one of the players is the dealer.
Yes. It's not like each time they show up to play, there's a different guy dealing. No, it's like these guys all sit in a circle. They play a hand. Then the next guy in the circle deals.
Becomes the dealer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So nobody profits. I mean, someone's going to go home with a little more money than they came because that's how poker works. But nobody is taking a cut off the top of it.
Yeah.
The preliminary hearing was enough to bind him over for trial. But even before that, they said, "Hey, we're gonna bring out more witnesses." So they actually extended the preliminary hearing to another day where they brought out more witnesses who talked about things that they saw there. The people who knew about the game but weren't invited because it was upstairs above a tavern. So they're like, "Hey, we're in this tavern. We know there's a game up there. I never get asked up. Boo." Yeah. One guy said that he was invited but never actually played because he was told that he shouldn't show up unless he brought at least $100. And which doesn't sound like a lot, but I did that little conversion, and $100 in 1965 is actually pretty close to $1,000 in 2024.
So that's a pretty significant amount of money.
Yeah, when you say, "Oh, you better bring 100," like that's not like a small game, but it's not huge. But when you say you better bring 1,000,
that's getting much bigger.
Yeah. So yeah, like if someone told me that don't show up to my game if you don't bring 1,000, I might not show up to that game.
Well, I can tell you I'm not showing up to that game.
Yeah. So it's bigger than it sounds because the numbers are vastly inflated now.
Mm-hmm.
There was a vice officer named William Lee who said that he had seen a poker table and chairs there and asked Dante Cardinale to remove them, but he never actually saw gambling in progress. So the vice cop knew what was going on. He just I just never saw it happen. Squeaky and Cookie were bound over for trial. Dante Cardinale was let go. Despite being above his tavern, there was little to connect him to the gambling directly, which seems a little unusual, but I mean, technically speaking, if it's the apartment's in another person's name, I guess you're not necessarily going to blame the tavern owner.
Mm-hmm.
If I have an apartment above a business, the business, I mean, I'm pretty sure Dante Cardinale knows what's going on here, but the business doesn't necessarily know what I'm doing in that apartment.
Right.
Dominic Frenzy said, because a few fellows from American Motors couldn't afford to join the Eagles, the Elks, or the Country Club, they went to this place to play cards, and they got hit with felony charges. The John Doe tried to get at City Hall and wound up getting some poor, broken-down gambling charges. It was also pointed out that both Squeaky and Cookie were allegedly card dealers on occasion, but there was nothing to suggest that they were profiting from this or taking a cut. In fact, some witnesses had said that any time there was extra money in the pot, it was taken to buy sandwiches and beers for the group.
Mm-hmm.
So Frenzy's coming forward here, and he's this is not really a defense, but he's trying to put it in the context where, hey, we've established there's gambling at the Eagles Club. You're not going after the Eagles Club. And he's also saying, this came out of the John Doe investigation. That was, you were looking into gambling, but you were really trying to look for corruption in politics and law enforcement. And you didn't get that. So instead you charged the low-level gambler guys here. So, like I said, not a defense. If you're charged with a crime and you did the crime,
just pointing out that what you're doing here is kind of shady.
Yeah. This, I think, is more, this is probably not going to sway the judge, but it's probably more for the public to be like, hey, think about this.
Yeah. Think what's happening here and how dumb it is.
Yeah, these guys aren't the major criminals that they want you to think they are.
And we may have talked about this in another episode because we talk about Dominic Frenzy all the time. But
yes,
do we know any history of was Dominic Frenzy himself a gambler?
I don't believe so.
Because what you read there just made it sound like he's very, very pro gambling.
No,
which I mean, obviously he's a defense attorney, so that's kind of what his job is. But at the same time, it seems like just something in the wording you said just jumped out at me, like he thinks this is stupid. You know what I mean?
Well, he never was caught gambling. I don't know of him ever gambling. He's defended many gamblers, and especially during this time period when the John Doe hearings are happening in different places and cracking down on gambling, which, as I say, is kind of not necessarily what they were set up to do, but kind of what came out of them. And some of these guys are definitely mob guys. Mm-hmm. So his connection there is obvious. And some of these guys aren't necessarily mob guys, but I think he's just kind of the go-to guy for defending these kind of gambling charges. But I don't know that he himself really is that way. I don't want to misquote him because I don't have the notes in front of me. But I actually think there's been something where he said he didn't even really like gambling or wasn't in favor of gambling. Mm-hmm. But but despite that, it's a dumb charge. He knows it's a dumb charge, and he's, it not necessarily. I shouldn't even say it's a dumb charge, but the way that this is done,
they're reaching. They're reaching for something, right?
They're reaching for something. And the newspapers went along with this because there'd be an article every time that somebody got arrested. They'd have their preliminary hearing. They'd have their follow-up court date. The newspapers covered this. And today, that's not going to happen. This would not be considered newsworthy at all. So there was and we've talked about that before. There was something about the way that the society viewed gambling then that they don't do now.
Yeah.
Where it was oh, this is the news.
Right.
There's a gambler here.
Yeah, and I think it was, I mean, I didn't live in that era, but I just feel like it was one of those things that people were afraid of. They thought it was ruining the world or something.
Yeah.
Whereas Like, it was the video games of that time or social media of that time.
Yeah.
Where people are like, this is just corrupting our world.
That could be.
Feeling.
That could be. And I mean,